The data science job market is pretty tough right now. It is tough even for seniors, but for juniors or fresh people who are trying to land their first data science job, it is particularly very, very difficult. I know people who have applied to even thousands of jobs without getting any interview calls. So, in this video, I'll share what I would do if I had to land my first job as a fresh data scientist. And I'll try to share my insights based on my 10 plus years of working in different tech companies as a data scientist, including Meta, Cisco, Wells Fargo, and also based on my experience of being in different hiring committees, hiring for many data scientists. So if you are an aspiring data scientist trying to land your first job, then hopefully this video will be insightful for you, because I'll try to share, based on my years of experience, what the hiring process looks like from a company's perspective. And by looking at that, you can modify your job search process so that you could increase your odds of landing the job. So when we try to look at what it takes to actually get a job, it is basically two things. First, you have to get interview calls, and second, you have to clear the interviews. So basically, these are the two stages you have to go through to be able to land the job. Now, of course, it is an oversimplification of it, and these two steps, they are very difficult to go through, especially for freshers. But I still wanted to call them out because what I see is that a lot of people are spending a lot of time on this section of how they can clear the interviews. Whereas I think the most important factor to focus on right now is that how you can get more interviews. And this process of getting the interviews is much more difficult than actually clearing the interviews. Why? I'll explain just in a little bit. Now, why is that? For that, let's look at what the hiring process looks like from a company's perspective. Let's say if I am working as a hiring manager in some company and I want to hire someone for a data scientist position, what would the process look like? First of all, I have to identify the need of hiring the data scientist. So that is the first step. This need could be someone left the company, so I have to hire their replacement, or the company is growing, there is more work to do, so I have to hire some new people to get into the team. Once that need is identified, then the first step is that as a hiring manager, I have to convince my leadership and my finance team that there is a need and I have to get their approval. Usually this approval is called requisition. And once this approval is done, then I get a rec opened for this position against which I can hire. I'm usually assigned a rec ID, which is a numerical number, and I take that rec ID and then I approach the company recruiter that this is a rec ID against which I have to hire someone. So at this stage, the recruiter gets involved. Now, once the recruiter comes into the picture, the first thing they do is they ask for the job description. They ask for what is the minimal criteria a candidate has to meet for it to be able to be eligible for interviews. And then they start advertising the job on different platforms like LinkedIn, Dice.com, and on company's website. So this is the stage of marketing. And once the job is advertised, then the application starts coming in. And at that stage, it is the recruiter's job to do some initial filtering. So recruiter does some screening here, so that anyone who does not pass the minimum criteria needed to be able to interviewed do not get to the next list. This includes usually what is the minimal education needed for that job, what is the minimum experience needed. They wanted to make sure that the person has a good communication and also that they're eligible to work in the country where the position is in. So recruiters usually, when they screen the resumes, sometimes they just discard some resumes, and after that everything else they usually put in some box folder or some SharePoint folder, and all the resumes start getting into that single folder so that the hiring manager and the team lead, they can start looking at it. Next step is hiring manager or tech lead. Now, after that, some resumes, very few resumes are shortlisted and they are called for initial interview. This initial interview is just usually 30 minutes telephonic call. generally with the hiring manager. And once you clear that, then the final step is that you go for the on site, which is a much more extensive interview. And if you clear that, then you get the final offer. Now, this process is very important to understand because what you would look at is that initially there are a lot of applications, but generally, after the hiring manager and tech lead screening, there are about 10 people who reach this stage of initial interview, and there are about 5 people who reach the stage of on site interview, and then finally one person gets the offer. Now, these numbers are very important to keep in mind because the next thing I'm going to show you is that what the competition looks like currently for the data science jobs. And why I was saying when we look at these two stages of getting the interviews and then clearing the interviews, getting the interviews is by far the most important and the most difficult thing to do right now. And then towards the end of the video, I'll explain my thoughts on what you can do to increase your odds of getting the interviews manifold. So now let's go to the LinkedIn and try to look at some data science job openings. And since I have LinkedIn Premium, I can look at how many people have actually applied for those roles and what does their profile look like. I am on LinkedIn. Let me go to LinkedIn jobs. And here, if I search for the term data scientist, and I have applied this entry level filter here so that I could just look at the roles which are entry level friendly. Let me also include associate. And yeah, I think these two are fine. Okay. So it has, the good thing is it still has 1,580 results across the US. But now let's look at how many people generally are applying for these roles. So this is definitely not an entry level role because this is a manager, but let's keep looking down. So this looks like more maybe a junior friendly role. We can see that it was reposted 1 week ago. It is in New York metropolitan area. It is hybrid, so not fully remote. So people have to go in some days. So people have to go in some days of a week. And when we go down here, we can see that it has 5,615 applications. And in terms of seniority, we can see most of the people are entry level, but there are 25% people who are senior applicants. 30% of the people have master's degree. Let's look at some other roles. This is staff data scientist, so definitely more senior role. I'm going to skip this one. Let's look at this one. Data scientist, posted in Chicago. It is a hybrid role, posted 3 weeks ago. And let's see how many people have applied. So 1,299, about 1,300 applications. Most of them are entry level applicants, but there's 20% senior, 6% people have PhD, 40% people have master's degree. Let's keep looking. Machine learning researcher, this is more a research role. This is more junior friendly role. So data scientist, 1 to 4 years experience, hedge fund, hybrid in New York City. So this was reposted 3 weeks ago, and it requires you to be in office 3 to 4 days. And let's look at how many. So 3,000 applicants, and 28% of the people are senior. 10% people have PhDs. 36% people have master's degree. And we can look at maybe quickly one more role. So this is data scientist 1 week ago, and let's look at the number of applications. 1,133 applicants, 25%, 24% senior level, 9% have PhD, about 40% have master's degree. So I just wanted to quickly show this to you to give you a sense of how much competition there currently is in the job market, especially for the junior roles. There are definitely more than 1,000 applications for each role, and about quarter of the person people applying have some experience, about 3 to 5 years experience. That's why they are senior, and a big chunk has PhDs and master's degree. So this is just to give you an idea of how bad or how competitive the current job market is for data science roles. So now, so far, we have seen that there are a lot of candidates applying for data science roles on LinkedIn. And then I've explained to you what the hiring process looks like behind the scene when we look at it from the company's perspective. So overall, just to sum it up, the process looks like a funnel. So at the top of the funnel, there are applications. After that, the next stage is recruiter screening. After that, there is a screening from hiring manager and tech lead. And once you qualify these screenings, then you are asked for initial interview. After that, the final thing is on-site, and then there is offer. Now, what we are seeing on LinkedIn that on average there is maybe over 1,000 applicants per any decent job. So we know that this number is about 1,000 plus. And we know that only usually one person gets the offer. So this means that there is a lot of competition. But let's further break it down. Generally, the recruiter screening at most filters out about 200 applicants. So if 1,000 people have applied for the job, at most about 800 people would qualify the initial criteria which is given to the recruiter. Again, it varies, but I'm just giving some average numbers to give you a sense of how this pipeline or this funnel works. So this hiring manager and tech lead screening, this is generally the hardest part where most of the candidates get filtered. Of these 800 people who have applied for the role and also their resume was approved by the recruiter and given to the hiring committee, only about 10 people get the invitation for the initial interview. And out of these 10 people, about 5 people are then selected for on-site interviews because these are longer interviews where different team members have to speak with that person. And this is usually considered expensive for the company. So companies do not want to do an on-site for a lot of people because it takes a lot of resources. So generally about 5 people get the invitation for on-site full interview rounds, and out of that, one person. Now, when you look at this pipeline from this perspective, you can see that the biggest drop is going from this 800 to this 10 people, because your chances here are about 1 in 80. Whereas if you somehow able to get to this round and you are in those lucky 10, then your chances of landing the job is 1 in 10. So that is why when I was initially saying that of the 2 stages, which is getting the interviews and then clearing the interviews, your chances in the first stage is 1 in 80, whereas your chances in the second round is 1 in 10. And you can see that there is a big difference between these two numbers. So now, as we have identified that what the bottleneck usually is to be able to get these roles, now the second question, how you can increase your odds so that when your odds are 1 into 80, how can you maximize your chances of getting the interview rounds? So the hint for that is till the stage you are asked into any kind of interviews, the only thing the hiring manager and the recruiter has seen is your resume. So whatever is in your resume, that is what enables them to make a decision whether to call you for interview or to not call you for the interview. So when a lot of people are trying to optimize their resume on how they can make it good enough that they start getting interview calls, I see a lot of freshers trying to spend on a couple of things which I do not agree at all. So I see a lot of freshers, they are trying to spend their time on either building some portfolio projects, or they are trying to spend their time on Kaggle to do some projects there. Or sometimes I see that they are trying to get some certifications from Udemy, from Coursera, from edX, or other websites, with the hope that they can put in these portfolio projects or these certifications or these Kaggle accomplishments into the resume so that the resume stands out. And it makes sense because they do not have some actual experience. So these are the things they can put into their resume to basically stand out. This used to work a little bit in the past, but currently I don't think these things work at all. And let me explain you why. If I am a hiring manager and if I see a resume that which has some portfolio projects, given that they have built this Twitter sentiment analysis, etc., and they usually post their GitHub links for those repos, I generally do not give any importance to those portfolio projects because first of all, I do not know what is the complexity of that code. I just do not have time when I am screening 800 or 1000 applications. I just do not have time to go look into your GitHub and try to understand the complexity of the code. Second, I do not know if you wrote that code yourself or you just copy pasted it from someone else's GitHub, because that is very easy to do and you can definitely do it. So that is why when I'm looking at the resumes, I do not give any importance to the portfolio projects which are listed. The second thing is Kaggle. I have worked on Kaggle. I can tell you that it gives you some initial knowledge, but after that, it is just hyperparameter tuning thing, and it does not give you a lot of knowledge. And also, sometimes it is very easy to game the system because the people who have some very good score in leaderboard generally make their notebooks publicly available, so that you can just use that as a starting point, make some tweaks, and get some decent performance. So I don't think Kaggle, for that reason, also indicates that you have a lot of depth in your knowledge, unless you are some Kaggle grandmaster or have some that kind of a tier. And the third thing is certifications. I also didn't give any importance to Udemy certifications, Coursera certification, because you can just play that video on a 2x speed and you'll get the certification at the end after just going through the course. And I have seen a lot of people, especially students, sharing the same Udemy, Coursera credentials. So if 10 people are sharing the same credential because they're trying to optimize the cost, it makes sense. Students do it a lot of time. Then everyone is getting the certification. So these certifications are just so easy to get and so easy to game the system. Any person who has been in the industry for some time know that it is very easy to game. And these are not trustworthy indicators of someone's competence. That is why when I am hiring, and I've seen it for a lot of other hiring managers, we do not give any importance to these three things. And unfortunately, I see a lot of freshers spending a lot of time on these things. So now the question is that what can you do if you do not spend time on here? Then what are the things you can do? When we look at the resume, in terms of importance, the very first thing, which is most important, is your experience. The thing which comes after that is your education or your degrees. And anything else basically comes after that. In this order, experience is the most important thing. Your education, your degrees, is the second most important thing, and anything else, any other credentials, they come after that. If you are a fresher and you do not have any prior experience, what you can do is, and what you should do, is try to get some real world verifiable experience into your resume. A lot of people do not fully explore it. I think it is fully possible. If you are willing to work without pay, then there are opportunities which you can find, and these are actual working experience which you can then put on your resume. For example, I see a lot of people who volunteer for some non-profits, and there are different websites who match the non-profit organizations who are working on some important thing but do not have enough budget that they can hire some full-time data scientists. And these fresh data scientists, they connect with those non-profit companies and they work for them, solving some actual business problems, working on it like a real job, and then getting some actual experience, which is not only valuable from resume standpoint, but also very valuable from experience perspectives, because when you try to create a personal project on your laptop with some data set which you have found online versus working with some stakeholders trying to actually solve some business problem using data, these are two totally different things. So when you volunteer with a nonprofit trying to get some actual experience, then you get that real world experience, and also you can put it on your resume that I've worked as a data scientist in this non-profit company from this time to this time, no one generally asks you to put if it was a paid opportunity or unpaid opportunity in the resume. And this is a verifiable experience. So this is pretty much everyone can do. And the good thing is that there are many platforms like DataKind, like Volunteer Match, like Data for Good. There are many websites where you can go and you can try to find such non-profit organizations which are hiring and looking for AI data science talent. Now, the other option, which is even better but more difficult to get, is try to get an unpaid opportunity at a startup. Now, startups generally do not have a lot of funds, and it is even more true currently. Most of the startups, they do not have money at all. So they cannot hire, but if you start approaching some startups, you can approach them that, hey, this is my expertise, do some research on that startup and try to explain to them that how you can bring value, and you're not asking for anything in return. If you are willing to put in that kind of work, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to find some startups who would say, okay, they are happy to bring you on board, but they won't pay you anything. Now, the reason this is an even better opportunity than going to these nonprofits is that down the line, there is a chance that that unpaid opportunity, as soon as the company gets funding, will convert into a full-time job offer, which is paid. And this is what you're looking for. So there are many websites from where you can get information about companies which are startup at initial stage. You can go to AngelList. I think now they are called Wellfound, to see the startups which are hiring. You can also go to Crunchbase to see that what are the new startups which are getting any kind of funding or investments. And you can proactively do some research on those companies, reach out to the key people they have on LinkedIn and tell them that how you can bring in some value without asking anything for in return. If you do that, I'm pretty sure that some company will say yes, and then you'll have your foot into the door so that you could work on some real world experience and also have that verifiable experience which you can put in your resume, so that your resume is not just blank and filled with some portfolio projects on GitHub. It is actually verifiable experience. So that is definitely the most important, highest leverage thing you can do. Get some experience. The second thing you can do is, if you have time and if you have money, you can get some actual education, some actual degrees. It doesn't matter if you get it online, but as long as it is from reputable institute and you have to go through some actual exam to get it, generally you can put it in your resume and it adds some credibility to your resume. It could be an MS, it could be an executive MS, it could be some other thing, but it should have a component of some actual exam so that you have to go through it to be able to get that. And ideally, the university or the institute awarding that degree should also be reputable. Now, coming to the third things, as I said, I am very against certificates, which you can easily get by just looking at a course at a 2x speed. And sometimes you don't even have to do it. You can ask someone else to go through the course. But if you really want to add something else, I think having some important certifications which have the component of a proctored exam and are coming from a brand name which is very reputable, that could be a good addition to your resume. Now, unfortunately, in data science, there are not a lot of good certifications available. The only ones which I know of is ML certification from AWS and GCP. And these are advanced certifications, not very easy thing to do. But the good thing about them is they are coming from either Amazon or Google. So very strong brand names. And everyone in the industry know that these are some difficult certifications to do. And if you are somehow able to do that, then that definitely adds a lot of value into your resume. Much better than putting 100 certificates of Udemy and Coursera on your resume. If you just have, I have a valid machine learning certifications from GCP or AWS, I think that's much more valuable. But keep in mind that to be able to do that certification, especially from these cloud providers, you have to have good expertise in machine learning and you have to have good expertise in using these cloud platforms. Now, from a jobs perspective, both of these are good skill sets. But if you're just trying to prepare from interview perspective, then a lot of the knowledge which you would be acquiring around cloud might not be very useful. So just keep that in mind. And if you are really keen into building some sort of GitHub portfolio, then the only thing which I would advise is that try to make some open source contributions. When you put that you have contributed towards an open source project, for example, Pandas or PyTorch or any other thing, then I instantly know that you have a very good expertise in coding and in that library. And the reason I know this is for all these popular open source projects, most of the people who are writing the code, they are very good at it. So to be able to contribute, you first of all have to understand the code which they have written, which is a very difficult thing to do for a fresher. And second, you have to make another contribution which is valuable enough that these other very experienced people approve that. Only then you can have some actual contribution into that open source project. And if you somehow are able to do it, then that gives a very clear signal to the hiring manager, to the tech lead, that you are a person with some very strong skill set. So these are my 2 cents in terms of how you can have some information on your resume which helps you stand out when your odds of success are 1 in 80. The only last thing is that how you package it and how do you present that information into the resume. I've shared in the description below the exact resume which I have used for last 10 years. It got me a lot of job offers and some very good jobs. So feel free to use that. But once you have mastered that piece, the initial thing, getting the interviews, then the next step is that how do you clear those interviews? And for this, I have created another video. It is a very detailed 40-minute long video in which I have explored in detail what are the demands and the skill set companies are actually asking for. I've looked at actual LinkedIn job descriptions, and based on that, I've outlined the entire workflow or what the plan should look like for you to prepare for these roles, so that when you sit in the interview for these roles, your odds of clearing the interviews are maximum, even if you are a fresher. So I hope when you look at this video, you'll find some very useful insights. So please check it out, and thank you so much for watching.